In this lesson, we're going to be talking about static and dynamic forms. And it's a pretty important lesson, and we want to get this concept into our minds before we move on to doing the forms of the body. Just like we have static and dynamic shapes that we learned about in Module 2, we have static and dynamic forms. So for example, this sphere presently, if you were to ask which direction it's moving in, it's pretty unclear. Like, we don't really know which direction it's moving in. It's basically not moving in any direction. But if you were to imagine this as a ball of clay and we started bending it into some kind of weird shape, maybe narrow at the top, wide at the bottom, so we kind of stretched it out, we start adding directionality to the shape. And that then turns this 3D shape, this form, into a directional form or a dynamic form. So the form now has directionality. It's no longer static. It appears that the shape of the form or the general structure of the form has some kind of directionality to it. Let's take a cube, for example. If we were to draw a cube, just your typical cube. That's a very isometric cube. In terms of the directionality of its form, the form itself doesn't really have directionality to it. However, as we start bending and changing things about this cube, we can mess with its structure, really, and give it a sense of directionality by bending its sides and making it more malleable in a sense. So now the cube is kind of stretching back this way. Let's do another example. Cylinders in particular are something we will be using to do a lot of the elements of the human form. So this is a typical cylinder drawing. I'm drawing through here. We can imagine this is the back side of the bottom cylinder, and we can see the top and the front sides. If I take the cylinder and I start bending its components, so I'll make one side of the cylinder smaller and one side of the cylinder bigger, and link those two sides together, we now have a bend in the form, and it appears to be moving in a direction. Whereas this type of cylinder, once again, has no directionality. So in this instance, what we essentially have are static forms, forms that do not appear to have any directionality or movement to them, and dynamic forms, forms that do appear to have some kind of directionality and some kind of movement to them. So as we move forward into doing the forms of the body, you'll see how we take static forms and convert them to dynamic forms. And this is really to help you understand the basic form, and then how we bring that form into more of a believable living type of form, right? A more dynamic, living kind of form that moves and changes, as we have with characters. All right, let's move on to the next lesson.